show, a little news, and we'll get to Jalen Carter. We'll talk some bold predictions with Pete, and then Emery Hunt will join us a little later in the show to talk some sleepers. And always remember, you can follow the show, the audio version and the video version with me and Rick, wherever you get your podcasts, on NFL at CBS on YouTube. So keep that in mind. But let's get to the news of the day, and it was sort of a surprise. And interestingly, Rick, we talked about this in the last podcast about how surprises can change the draft board. And specifically, we were talking about the 2016 draft with Larry Tunsil. Today, around 10 a.m. Eastern time, we were waiting for the defensive lineman to talk to the media, and specifically Jalen Carter, because all morning, if you've watched on CBS Sports HQ, we had the defensive lineman come through here and had a great time talking to many of them. 10:08, no Jalen Carter, and then we found out the allegations. We saw Jacqueline just talk about the statement he released. Well, he feels he'll be fully exonerated. What does this do as a GM when you hear news like this? And there were interviews previously, and there were reports that Jalen did not mention anything to the teams about the news that came out today about the car crash and the racing allegations. If you're a general manager, you're here today, you find this out at 10:08 a.m., what is your order of operations?
Well, the positive, if there is any positive out of this, is that you found out today instead of the day of the draft. But this is going to make everybody go back. They're going to use the resources with NFL security, what they provide. They're going to use their own personal security. You're going to do a lot of research, a lot of investigation. I don't know if this will lead into anything more or any serious charges down the road. Could it potentially lead to jail time? But for sure, this will affect where he goes in the draft.
But if it's just misdemeanors, which it is right now, does it affect where he goes in the draft?
I think because of the tragedy of two young people
losing their lives. It's a terrible tragedy, but if it's not a criminal, major crime and it's a misdemeanor, does it affect where he goes in the draft?
I think that's going to be up to each individual organization, how comfortable they are with the allegations. You're going to have to get approval from ownership. You're going to have to tie the business side of the operation into this decision, because you don't want to lose sponsors. Let's say a major sponsor of an organization says, well, we don't want to be associated with your team anymore because you're bringing in a player that was associated with the loss of two young lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tragedy. I mean, first and foremost, forget about football.
Yeah.
Those two people lost their lives. It's a tragedy. Could have been, anybody not related to the game in the NFL. So it's a tragedy, period. But I think you got to look at it from a bunch of different perspectives. One, if there are serious charges, he's going to have problems. If they're just misdemeanors, I think what will be highlighted is the fact that, according to reports, he lied about it.
Right.
And if you're a team drafting a guy, and he, even with the misdemeanors, which won't, if it's just misdemeanors, they're not going to preclude a team from taking him. I just don't think that'll happen. But the fact he lied about it, that's not a good thing for a kid going into the NFL draft.
And he did not bring it up, as Ryan, you mentioned earlier. He did not bring it up in any of the interviews that he participated in Monday night or Tuesday.
I talked to a guy that was in a meeting with him, and he was very – and this was before this even came to light. He told me, unsolicited, he said he was very prepped for his interview. In other words, he knew that, A, maybe he knew that was in his background, but, B, he knew that they were going to come after him because there's been reports – was it Todd McShay or somebody from ESPN reported that there were character concerns with him. And so there's other stuff at play here. This is a horrible, horrible tragedy. But as it relates to football, I think it's to be determined what it does for him in the football setting.
Yeah, but if this case, and I'm going to ask you this and you both, that if you're the general manager and you're talking to your ownership group and the trial, if there is a trial, is not going to be till after the draft, and you don't know how that trial would turn out, would you still take the risk of potentially drafting him?
Well, if there's misdemeanor charges, there's not going to be a trial. I mean, usually there's no trials in misdemeanor charges, so there's not going to be a trial. If it gets upgraded, then it's a major problem.
Right.
Then it's a major problem for him. And then I think you're talking about the issues. But if it stays the way it is right now, the exact way it is, I don't think it's going to be that big a deal. I just don't. It's a terrible tragedy, but I don't think it's going to be that big a deal. The fact he lied about it isn't going to help him either.
No.
Here's the other thing. Why was it released today?
Well, I mean, it's like the Larry Tunsil thing that came out literally moments before the draft started. And Rick and I talked about this. It's the shock factor. And now, as an NFL team, you're scrambling to figure out what you have to do and how much time you have to do it. Now, the timing here is terrible, no doubt about it. But Rick, and we'll move on in a second. Let's shorten this up because we have other things to talk about, even though this is incredibly important. But this at least affords you the opportunity of time between now and the draft to sort out what you're going to do.
Yeah, and that's what we mentioned earlier in the podcast, is that if this did not happen on draft day, because if it happened on draft day, he could have been off a lot of teams' boards. So this is going to give teams an opportunity to do everything necessary to find out the answers, and if they're willing to take the risk on a player that's very talented but has these issues coming in.
Well, here's the other thing, and this is going to sound crass and demented, but there are teams at the back end of the first round or 15 down that are sitting there saying, oh, he might fall to us now. And they'll take him.
Yeah.
They'll take him.
Yeah, someone's going to take him.
Because he's a let's be real, he's one of the two best defensive players in this draft.
If not the best defensive
Correct.
player.
So if somebody at the back end, from a draft, we're just talking about from a football standpoint. Right. We're not talking about what happened. We don't know the specifics of it. We don't know how it's going to play out. But if there's something there, not major, and I can tell you there's teams at the back end of the first round that would take him.
It'll be interesting to see which one's willing to do that.